Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is Ghazala Amin with your lecture number 7. And in project management, some of the fundamental concepts that are still going on and moving on to the project organization and integration. A little brief summary of what we talked about in the last lecture. We talked about the non-project based organizations and the project-based organizations. We talked about what are projects and what are not projects. Then within the project-based organizations, we talked about the organizations that are in its infancy stages of thinking, yes, we want to get into it, which are the functional organizations, and some organizations which are the epitome of having that mindset of effective and efficient implementation and meeting the time constraints and meeting all of the triple constraints, not just the time constraints of the project, and understanding the importance of the delivery, having the work ethics and the professional ethics of understanding and managing the work and the project processes will probably fall under, will not just probably, will fall under the category of projectized industries. In between would be the matrix organizations. Within the matrix organizations, organizations that are just kind of trying to get to the project-based or projectized industries are considered more of functional matrix or the weak matrix. Matrix organizations which are in between will be considered the balanced matrix. And then the project matrix or the strong matrix organizations. Very few projectized or project industries in the world, many more in the balanced matrix, and multiple more and mostly in the form of functional organizations. We also talked about the importance of how complicated it is for a project manager to manage and deliver in a functional or a weak matrix situation. Most of the time, these project managers do not have a full-time role managing that particular project and generally do not have the title project manager. They tend to have titles as project coordinators and project expediters. Starting from a balanced to strong matrix to project-based, you tend to have a full-time allocated person with the title of project manager for handling projects. You also tend to have full-time resources allocated under you to deliver your project scope. And hence the team development becomes a little bit of an easier task for the project manager because the responsibility and accountability is simplified in this situation. For smaller projects which don't have a very stringent deadlines, you can survive in a functional and a weak matrix organizations. However, we all need to understand that the large and complex projects need to have full-time resources with very stringent processes in place, and they should be situated in a balanced to project-based organization. Depending on the needs of the project, you can also have variation of being in a situation that fulfills the definition of a functional organization, or on the same note, all of it because of the needs of the project, you could be put into a situation where all processes and all your resources are following the typical pattern of project-based organization. Moving on, let's see what other things we have. out there for you. While we talk about all these situations, one thing that is consistent is the role and responsibility of a project manager. Think of this project manager as this one person who's directing a choir. Multiple people running around doing their own little thing. And you have to train them, discipline them, to follow your processes, follow your orders, to have the professional ethics or the responsibilities that you actually require them to have from the beginning. Sometimes you have to train them. You have to motivate them. You have to resolve conflicts. You're doing multiple things to ensure that your work, your project meets its intended goal. And you're that one person in between the whole world of craziness. Project manager, and I've used that example before, and it would be wonderful to use this example again and again later on, is that one person who's juggling with multiple balls, like that juggler out there. But this time you're not just juggling with tennis balls, you are juggling with little eggs. And you cannot allow any of those eggs to fall on the ground, because any time that one egg falls on the floor, there's a mess that gets created. And a little bit of I'm becoming a little philosophical when I talk about the mess being created, because more people you have trying to clean that mess will complicate your life as a juggler who's standing in between, and while you're trying to juggle with other ball or other eggs, there are people trying to gain your attention or grab your attention. So, having said that, you are that one person with multiple things going around. A project manager needs to have the key general management skills also. It encompasses planning, organizing, executing, and controlling operations of an ongoing enterprise or an ongoing project. So those are the general management skills. General management skills also require foundation for building project management skills. So anyone who is accustomed to the general management skills should have the groundwork already done for himself or herself into becoming a successful project manager. So what would be those required general management skills for a project manager? Some on top of our head or some top of our mind would be leading, communicating, negotiating, problem solving, influencing the organization. And there are several more. What about motivation? What about networking? What about getting the right resources? Make sure that your priorities are understood by the organization, and that probably comes under influencing the organization, understanding the importance of it, and also at the end of it, when you have met the goals, getting the light laurels, not just for yourself, but for your team who contributed in its success. When you needed help, you had the right help provided at the right time. Communication, communication, and communication. You should have wonderful written communication skills. You should have wonderful verbal communication skills. You should have that tact of saying the right things at the right time, getting the right work done at the right time, doing the right things. So let's look at that little picture. And says the basic functions of general management equally apply to project management. And now in the middle of the bubble, You just not have a project manager, but you have all of the project resources. You have the planning, the organization, the motivation, and the directing, the control. So let's start off with planning. What are we aiming for and why? Organizing. What's involved and why? Motivation. What brings out the best in people? And directing. Who decides what and when? All of these are functions of project management. At the bottom of the slide, you will see the reference from it. Again, it would be great if you can go out and read the reference material which made the basis of this particular slide. If I look at this particular slide, we've talked enough about it and kind of grasping the main idea and bringing it all back. The first process was the initiating process. We will focus our attention on the basic, the basis, and the needs of this particular phase. It's the starting phase of the project. Looking at the bell curve, your project organization and you have minimal number of resources assigned to it, and you have to make the most and the best out of what you have to understand that is it beneficial for you as an individual, and you as an individual from a project organization, is it beneficial for you and your organization to continue to put your effort and work into it? What is the customer trying to achieve, and why is the customer trying to achieve those targets? So let's focus on the initiating processes of the first phase of the project life cycle. The definition of the initiation phase is the process of formally authorizing and recognizing that a new project exists, or that an existing project should continue on to its next phase. When we talk about the project initiation phase, a couple of things come to our head. The required end product from the project is described at a very high level. And again, why is it at a high level? Understanding the bell curve again is that you don't have a lot of resources, you have minimal resources working on it. So it's the customer's mindset of what the customer wants to achieve is only the objective that you have in your hand as a project manager right now. There has been no time spent to dig in. The customer may or may not have done their own little feasibility study to understand the benefit of this project. If they have, then you will have a little bit more information. The company makes a decision of whether to go ahead with the project. Now it is your own project organization, with its limited resources, with its minimal resources, making that decision of understanding, will it be beneficial for my company or my organization to put in the effort, and at the end of the day, will I make substantial profit off of this? Remember, money is not always the main target. There are situations when organizations tend to do a certain project for certain other needs that they're trying to achieve or meet, or if it is in compliance to the vision of meeting certain objectives in the next 5 or 10 years. And if it is confusing you guys, let's look at an example. The smaller software development company has this offer of doing a small project from a big marketing giant. Even though the profit margin is very slim, because you are just coming up, you would love to have, or you would love to have their name represented on your portfolio as you as an organization having worked for that big name. You would love to take up that project. And in some situations, you know that you may not even make any profit on this scenario. But it would be getting your foot into the door, and there will be multiple other situations just by looking at your work with this retail giant would actually be coming your way. So whatever the reason is, if your project organization tends to believe that it is in compliance to the vision, or it's in compliance with their business objectives, they may or may not decide to take on this project, and all this decision is done in the initiation phase of the project. Within the initiation phase of the project, all or any historical data pertaining to type of project is also reviewed. So this data could be obtained from the customer itself, or this data can be obtained from your own project organization or your own general scavenger hunt. Or you have done similar projects before, and that makes your life a little bit easier because now you're making or building something similar. Within the project initiation phase, with your minimal resources, a wise investment will be to get some expert judgment of staff or SMEs, which are subject matter experts, need to be procured to understand the cost benefit, or to do an analysis of what is required and what will it take for successful completion of the project. All that work that gets done during the project initiation phase result in several things. One of the more important tangible documents out of this particular phase is a project charter. Another important activity is assignment of a project manager. Remember, from some of the last slides that we reviewed, within the project initiation phase, or prior to the project initiation phase, the marketing representatives or the marketing department goes out, sees an opportunity, creates a business opportunity document, and brings in this project. At this point in time, depending on the project organization and where you lie within the matrix situation or the functional or the project-based organization that we discussed last week, a project manager will be assigned. So you as a project manager will be assigned to this project during the initiation phases. At this point in time, another important activity will be going on. Is another process, is identification of stakeholders. And remember, stakeholders are many. But what you're trying to achieve at this point in time is to find the right stakeholders who will contribute to successful deployment of your project or successful execution of your project. And these will be the project sponsors who will support and review / approve the activities of the project. So it's not just identification of all stakeholders, but more importantly so, identification of sponsors who will give you the nudge in the right direction whenever it's needed. In the upward communication phase of the project also, these will be the sponsors that will be receiving the status reports. These will be the sponsors that will be looking and reviewing your project activities and approving it. These will be the sponsors who will also be part of your CCB board or the change control board. So they need to understand why the project was undertaken, the need for implementation at the right time and on schedule, and everything else that goes on with successful implementation of the project. So initiation phase will be the right phase to actually identify your project sponsors who will continue, hopefully, with the successful execution or throughout the life of the project life cycle. If you look at the slide, within the initiation phase, you're looking at only 2 processes according to PMBOK, and that's the 4th edition. Development of a project charter and identification of stakeholders. Development of a project charter, that document that will have all on everything that you can grab hold of with minimal number of resources. And the more important aspect of identification of stakeholder activity or process is identification of your project sponsors. The project sponsors not just from the customer organization, but also from your own project organization who will support you when you have issues with resources, depending on if you fall, whatever category of organization you fall into. So having talked about the initiation phase, I'm going to take up a knowledge area, which is the project integration management. Out of the 9 knowledge areas, if we start off with the project integration management, project integration management is probably the most important aspect or most important skill for a project manager. When I talked about the balls and I talked about the eggs, another example would be, these would be little pearls. And these pearls are all over the place, and these are the processes scattered and strewn across the project. You take the right pearls and you knit them together, and all of a sudden it becomes a pearl string. Or if these are the chains, these are all linked together. Or if these are the keys, these are all chained together or linked together to make a beautiful chain. The first knowledge area that we will be talking about in today's lecture will be the integration management, and one of the more important ones. Project integration management includes the processes which are needed to identify, define, combine, unify, and coordinate the various project management processes in the project process groups. For example, development of the charter, preliminary scope statement, and project plan. Directing and managing project execution, monitoring and controlling work, especially the project work, integrated change control, and project closure. So it's really the start and the end of it all. Integration is crucial for project completion, meeting stakeholders' expectations and need, making choices where to concentrate resources over time, dealing with issues, and coordinating project activities. Let's go back a little bit. If you look at integration management, and this will be the gray box. Development of a project charter is in the initiation phase. So any knowledge areas will be across different phases of the project. So the first process of project integration management starts off in the initiation phase, the top left corner of the box. Coming down in no particular order will be development of project management plan. From that point onwards, you move to the execution phase of the project, which is directing and managing project execution. Then under the monitoring and control, you will monitor and control project work and performing integrated change control. And then moving on, or last but not the least, will be your closure project or closing out of the project or the project phase. Again, from start to end, pulling it all together will be your knowledge area, which is project integration management, strewn across all the 5 phases of the project. So project management and the word project integration management. Within the project integration management, couple of things that are important would be ensuring coordination of project elements, involving making trade-offs among competing objectives and alternatives, and bringing the project together. So that pearl string that I talked about is bringing everything from the initiation phase to the closure phase and putting it all together so that for the customer it seems like a seamless piece of art from one phase to the last, from the first phase to the last phase. Project integration management. There are several processes according to PMBOK. We talked about the color-coded slides. So where are they? They're all over the place. In the initiation phase, you have the developing of the project charter. In the planning phase, you have the project plan development. Under the execution is directing and managing project execution. Control has 2 integration processes, monitoring and monitoring the control and controlling the work products, and then managing the integrated change control. And then closing would be the closing of the project phases. Every process, remember, has inputs, tools and techniques that are applied to get to the output. Some are core processes, some are facilitating processes. No matter what we use, we have to understand that every process, the 42 processes within the 9 knowledge areas, have multiple inputs, multiple outputs, and multiple tools and techniques that are applied to each one of them. The first tangible piece of document, and you can come across different words that are being used for the project charter document, but in project management world we tend to use the word project charter document. This is the initial contract between the customer and the project organization. A document that formally authorizes the existence of a project. The initial most important document that legally and formally authorizes the existence of the project. And this is the PMI definition. This is the single most important document that authorizes the project manager now to start applying more resources to your project activities. Remember, this is the beginning of that bell curve moving on to its maximum capacity, or the peak of the bell curve. It is issued by the project sponsor or a senior official outside the level of project organization. Obviously, who will authorize or legally give the project manager that capability of applying project resources? It has to be the senior management or the senior sponsors that we talked about, not just from your own project organization, but also from the customer organization that is actually providing the funding to proceed on with the project. Your project charter should include, besides other things, the more important things, reasons for undertaking the project, project objectives and constraints, and identification of main stakeholders. Now, charter and identification of main stakeholders are also 2 separate processes. Again, which phase is it developed in? Obviously the initiation phase of the integration management. When we are looking at developing a project charter, there are certain mandatory sets of information that has to be provided. In every charter, these headings should be part of the document. Information contained in or referred to in other project documents. The project charter may span the following. It may have multiple more. If you do not have information for any of these particular headings, it is suggested that you use not applicable for this particular project, but do not delete it, because if you create a template that can be used on multiple projects, you need to have an area or you need to have a heading where that particular information will go on in future projects. An important thing is the project background. You need to have an understanding of what was the basis for the initiation of the project. Purpose for undertaking the project. Project justification. Why am I doing this? The requirements, to as specific as possible. Stakeholders' expectations from the project. Assumptions and constraints. The assumptions up front and the constraints. And these assumptions and constraints will become feeding material for identifying risks in the next phase of the project, which would be the planning phase of the project. The project organization as it stands right now, and not just the project organization for you, but also a copy of the project organization structure of the customer will come in handy, because you will need to know who to contact for a certain activity and some kind of a contact list. Stakeholders' roles and responsibilities. Who will be helping me with this project, and does that person or does that organization have an understanding that I may be contacting them for further refinement, and they should make themselves available to ensure that I do not lose time in this project because of their constraints. Schedule and milestones. This is the initial expectation of the customer. Remember, you do not have the resources as a project manager to invest in the further planning and further refinement. So this is based on the customer's understanding and a general understanding of what those milestones are all about. How frequently, or what would be the time frame. Just a generic or a generalized time frame. And then some indication of a budget. It should be clearly indicated that the project charter is just an initial document. At this point in time, major investment in resources has not been made, and we are making basis, or we are making the most out of the information that has been provided to us as project organization or as the project manager. The next process that you see out there is the project plan development. And now you have moved on from the initiation phase to the planning phase of the project. And slowly and gradually resources are trickling your way, because after signing off the charter, you now have the formal or the legal approval to add or allocate more resources to this particular project. Hence, the start of your project plan. The definition of your project plan will be using output from other. The project plan uses outputs from other planning processes to create a consistent and coherent document that can be used to guide both project execution and project control. Project plan is not a document. It is a combination of several documents that are out there. Just like initiation and just like the charter, you get all of the information and you pull it together as little folders or little files within the project charter document. Project plan is also combination of multiple documentations or multiple planning documents that exist or have been created to help with your project execution. And it will also help in not just the execution, but monitoring and control phase of the project also. Things that are in the bottom of the slides are sometimes put out there, so it's also summarization of what we've talked about or important ideas that are reiterated for your common understanding. So what would be a process? A process is a series of actions bringing about a result. And project plan development is a process within the 42 processes according to PMBOK, feeding into the 9 knowledge areas. Individual processes within a process group are linked by their inputs and outputs, and tools and techniques are applied to the input to create an output. So I said project plan is multiple documents. And within the planning phase, your day in, day out is thinking of how to plan everything right. So there is minimal work towards the end or during the execution process. 65% approximately, 65% of approximate time for a project manager is spent during the planning phase. If that is a true reflection of the work that goes in, then if a project manager invests that much time during the planning phase accurately, documenting, describing, monitoring, getting the input from others, putting it all together, then during the execution phase, he or she minimizes the probability of anything going wrong. So what is a project plan? Formal approved document or documents used to manage and control project execution. Now let's talk about when I said multiple documents, what did I mean? Your project plan would include project charter. That becomes the first. So think of this big folder with multiple leaflets in it, or think of a folder on your desktop with multiple folders underneath it. The first one being the project charter. The project charter has all of the information that was talked about in the earlier slides, including organization, some of the contact list, blah blah, and so forth. Another important folder within the main project plan folder would be your WBS. It's the work breakdown structure. And the start of looking at your project and dividing your project into subtasks from A to Z based on your understanding at that point in time. And at this point in time, you will start using your WBS to come up with task and resource assignments. Another folder within your project plan folder would be your major milestones and baseline target delivery dates. Risks, issues, change management plan, communication management plan, quality management plan, how you will be closing out your activities, the closure documents, the lessons learned document, part of the closure folder, Coming up, the technical documents, the how-to manual, the training and the skills development, what's the plan, what kind of skill sets are needed, and which organization will I be working with to provide the appropriate skill set and the training needs to fulfill my individual project's requirement and needs. All that planning will be done, captured, documented, and put together under the main folder of project plan. So project plan is not a document. Project plan is multiple documents, the formats or the templates without any content at this point in time, put in right spot, so when we start off with execution and monitoring and control, all these documents will be approved and provided and will be in easy access, so to be filled appropriately. Project plan is the most complete documents that helps the project team deliver tasks. More emphasis on project plan is more time is spent in the planning phase. Easier the life of the project manager is in the execution and the monitoring and control phase. And it's not just the project manager. It is the life of the team members also. Any issues that you see during the planning phase can be identified as risks, documented, set forth, shared with the customer, so a general understanding is developed in the initial phases or the planning phases of the project. The next process, if you move on from the project planning phase, is under the execution, and which is the project plan, execution, and control. It's the primary process for carrying out the project plan. So now we have created templates and empty documents in the planning phase. We kind of created a roadmap for ourselves that this is how we will follow. Under the communication management plan, you have a template and you have a roadmap that every Monday I will have a status report submitted to the project sponsors. Every Friday prior to that submission, I will have my own team meeting to get status of where they are. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to capture all that information, put that in the status report, so all information is accurate and up to date for the Monday submission. All that information was put under the communication management plan in the planning phase of it. And now when we start execution, we follow the communication plan, and we start following that roadmap to the successful delivery of our project. The process under the project integration management knowledge area, the project plan, execution, and control, is a primary process for carrying out the project plan. So what was planned is now being executed. And these are the processes and actions to monitor execution of the project plan. Again, think of that project manager. The project manager must integrate and manage multiple processes at any time during the project life cycle. So there's not some chronological order or sequential following of processes and tasks. Hence, the same concept of a project manager juggling with multiple balls at the same time, but making sure the priorities of the project are very clearly identified. Under the integrated change control process, these are the influencing factors which create changes to ensure that changes are beneficial. So, we talked a little bit about the changes, and I'm going to talk maybe a bit more now. Is determining that a change has occurred, managing the actual change when and as they occur. In one of the earlier slides, we talked about change management and how it occurs throughout the project life cycle, from the initiation to the closure phase, the project manager continues to monitor changes to their project. There is no project, whether simple or complex, that does not come across changes. Things to remember and digest at this point in time: that changes are not always negative. Changes are beneficial. Oversight by the customer and your own team during the initial phases are now very apparent and can be made. Remember, the execution team can come up with the most beneficial changes to the project. And they have to be given space and a communication medium to share those changes that can positively impact your project. All those changes are documented. Some changes are quick changes. Anytime the changes affect your triple constraints are considered major changes. Those changes need to be documented in detail, and they need to be reviewed with the CCV board. All changes should be documented in a change log. Changes that are going to affect your triple constraints need to be taken in front of the CCV board, reviewed and approved. No unapproved changes should be made part of your project. That is your responsibility as a project manager, to ensure that no spur-of-the-moment changes, no last-minute details should be added to your original or intended scope of the project without notifying the appropriate beneficiaries or the change control members. Having said that, within your communication management plan, you also need to identify an opportunity for the CCB members to review and approve those changes as seemed or as appropriate. Usually, at the end of the sponsors meeting, there should be a 10 to 15 minute slot for review of all these changes, and it should be on a regular meeting notice. So again, for the integrated change control, these are influencing factors which create changes and ensure that changes are beneficial, determining that a change has occurred, and managing the actual changes when and as they occur. When you look at the project closure is one of the more important aspects which are always given less importance than what they are demanding or what they need. Project closure consists of documenting project results to formalize acceptance of the product of the project by the project sponsor or the customer. Your project closure would include several things: lessons learned, historical archives, customer or end user sign-off, team appraisals, etc., etc. The last process of the whole group of processes making the project integration management knowledge area has been given its own important role in the closure phase of it. And why is the reason why we usually as project managers tend to ignore some of these processes? And the main reason is that by the end of the project, not only your team members are ready to fly off or move out of your project, yourself as a project manager, you are also looking at other project opportunities or may already be assigned to take up another project. So your attention to detail has also been diluted at this point in time. It is extremely important to list these tasks in the initial phases of the project as part of your WBS, and resources are assigned to it with right estimated time effort, so to ensure that the project work does get done and the project does get closed at the end of the project. Let's look at some of these tasks that has been identified for you. Lessons learned. These are the sads and the glads of the project. Things that went right or things that did not go as well as you thought should have gone. The easiest way is not to do this by your own self as a project manager. It's better to actually get a facilitator, get your project team in the room, and they should ideally come in prepared with at least 5 things that went right and 5 things that did not go right, so to use that as an icebreaker. The facilitator starts off on the whiteboard with things that went right and things that did not go right. And now you will have multiple opportunities to look at things either way. And what's the importance of doing it at the end of the project? To ensure that those issues, or to ensure that those things are either done again if they were the brighter side of the project, or not to repeat the same mistakes. Historical archives, all the documentation needs to be put together under the folder of the project and archived. CDs should be burnt and safely kept. Customer or end user sign-off should be acquired and procured at this point in time. And that will ensure that the intended need of the project is met. The team appraisals or the performance appraisals. As project manager, we have a mighty big responsibility on our shoulders, and that is to ensure that your team appraisals are done positively. It's called the constructive feedback. It's your opportunity to help develop somebody's skill set, to pinpoint positive aspects of it. And if there were some less than positive aspects in any personality, then it's your opportunity to provide situations which can improve upon that person's setback or skill sets that are not really up to the mark. Use this opportunity wisely. Always appreciate in public, but criticize in person. Avoid using team meetings, avoid using people's presence to criticize any aspect of any person. So one thing that we always need to remember as project managers, that it's our responsibility to improve upon somebody's skill set, and we should always use that wisely. If we summarize everything that we talked about in this particular lecture, lecture number 7, we reiterated some of the thought processes that have already been talked about. We talked in particular about the project initiation activities. And what do we do in the project initiation cycle? With minimal resources, the best you can do is to gain most out of the customer and the customer's organization. We need to understand the importance of the charter document, and every information that you can grab hold from the customer needs to be added to your charter documentation, because that is the initial document that creates that legal binding between you as a project manager, the project organization, and the customer. The project manager gets that legal authority to apply more resources to the project after the sign-off from the customer on that project charter document. The charter document has many names in different organizations. We also hear about the word contract, we also hear about the word proposal, but the project management lingo uses the word project charter document, which is the single most and the most initial document that is created as a handshake or a legal document that is created between the customer and the project organization. We touched upon the first knowledge area, according to PMBOK. And the knowledge area was the project integration management. And I talked about the start and the end of the processes. In the initiation phase, the first process obviously is creation of a charter document. Then we moved on to the planning, the project plan. And the most misunderstood word for project plan is creation of that work plan or the activities. Now we understand that listing of all the activities from taking the project to the start to the end is not a project plan. It is just a work breakdown structure. Project plan is the most complete and coherent document that helps us as project managers to, throughout the execution and monitoring and control of the project, including the closure phase. So project plan is are multiple documents that are created as part of the project planning phase. Then moving on to the processes under the execution and the control phase and the monitoring and control. The important aspect is that there's also a process out there for integrated change control. Whenever there is a change, it needs to be documented, and when you see an approved document or when you get an approved change, you go back to the drawing board, make sure that the planning is done for successful implementation of that change, go back to the execution, and then come to the closure phase. I continue to put in so much emphasis on the closure phase, and the reason is just the fact that none of us, and I think most of us, are guilty of spending less than the required time on this closure phase. But if we plan it all out well, and if we do it well, then the chances of our project becoming successful also increases multiple time. And we don't fall into the category of only 35% of the projects being successful. We do fall into the category of the 35% which are successful projects. Wishing you best of luck. Enjoy reading. Look at some of the relevant materials on the websites that are available for you to read. Look at all the reference material that has been provided. Review the presentations and the slides that have been created for your understanding, and get the most out of this lecture. Wishing you all the best, and I will see you next week with lecture number 8. Allah Hafiz and good luck to you.